Audio Jungle.
Hello, my name is Nwago Francis. I'm from Nigeria. Welcome to my YouTube channel of learning important words and phrases in different languages. Do you want to learn how to say good evening in different languages? I've got that for you. Let's get started. The first language is Spanish. In Spanish, you want to say good evening. You say Buenas noches. Buenas noches. Buenas noches. The second language is Portuguese. In Portuguese, you want to say good evening. You say boa noite. Boa noite. Boa noite. The third language is French. In French, you want to say good evening. You say bonsoir. Bonsoir. Bonsoir. The next language is Romanian. In Romanian, you want to say good evening. You say Buonasera. Buonasera. Buonasera. The next language is Italian. In Italian, you want to say good evening. You say Buonasera. Buonasera. Buonasera. The next language is Catalan. In Catalan, you want to say good evening. You say Bon tarda. Bona tarda. Bona tarda. The next language is Mandarin Chinese. In Mandarin Chinese, you want to say good evening. You say Wan Shao Hao. Wan Shao Hao. Wan Shao Hao. The next language is Japanese. In Japanese, you want to say good evening. You say Konbanwa. Konbanwa. Konbanwa. The next language is Korean. In Korean, you want to say good evening. You say Annyunghaseyo. Annyunghaseyo. Annyunghaseyo. The next language is Cantonese. In Cantonese, you want to say good evening. You say on. On. The next language is Thai language. In Thai language, you want to say good evening. You say Sa-wat-di-don-yin. Sa-wat-di-don-yin. Sa-wat-di-don-yin. The next language is Vietnamese. In Vietnamese, you want to say good evening. You say Shabunto. Shabunto. Shabunto. The next Afrikaans. In Afrikaans, you want to say good evening. You say Goedenavond. Goedenavond. Goedenavond. The next language is German. In German, you want to say good evening. You say Guten abend. Guten abend. Guten abend. The next language is English. In English, you want to say good evening. You say good evening. Good evening. Good evening. The next language is Norwegian. In Norwegian, you want to say good evening. You say good kev. Good kev. Good kev. The next language is Dutch language. In Dutch, you want to say good evening. You say Goedenavond. Goedenavond. Goedenavond. The next language is Turkish. In Turkish, you want to say good evening. You say İyi akşamlar. İyi akşamlar. İyi akşamlar. The next language is Russian. In Russian, you want to say good evening. You say Dobriy вечер. Dobriy вечер. Dobriy вечер. The next language is Czech language. In Czech language, you want to say good evening. You say Dobriy вечер. Dobriy вечер. The next language is Croatian. In Croatian, you want to say good evening. You say Dobra вечер. Dobra вечer. Dobra вечer. The next language is Polish. In Polish, you want to say good evening. You say Dobro wieczór. Dobro wieczór. Dobro wieczór. The next language is Serbian. In Serbian, you want to say good evening. You say Dobra večer. Dobra večer. Dobra večer. The next language is Slovenian. In Slovenian, you want to say good evening. You say Dober večer. Dober večer. Dober večer. The next language is Arabic. In Arabic, you want to say good evening. You say Masa akeya. Masa akeya. Masa akeya. The next language is Hindi. In Hindi, you want to say good evening. You say Sundaya. Sundaya. Sundaya. The next language is Hebrew. In Hebrew, you want to say good evening. You say Erev Tov. Erev Tov. Erev Tov. The next language is Greek. In Greek, you want to say good evening. You say Kalispera. Kalispera. Kalispera. The next language is Icelandic. In Icelandic, you want to say good evening, you say God's void. God's void. God's void. The next language is Finnish. In Finnish language, you want to say good evening, you say Huva itao. Huva itao. Huva itao. The next language is Hungarian. In Hungarian, you want to say good evening, you say Yo estet kivanok. Yo estet kivanok. Yo estet kivanok. The next language is Ukrainian. In Ukrainian language, you want to say good evening, you say Dobry veshi. Dobry veshi. Dobry veshi. The next language is Danish. In Danish, you want to say good evening, you say good aften. Good aften. Good aften. The next language is Irish. In Irish, you want to say good evening, you say Chononama. Chononama. Chononama. The next language is Swedish. In Swedish, you want to say good evening, you say good vai. Good vai. Good vai. The next language is Welsh. In Welsh, you want to say good evening, you say nos wife. Nos wife. Nos wife. The next language is Tagalog. In Tagalog, you want to say good evening, you say Magandang hapon. Magandang hapon. Magandang hapon. The next language is Malay. In Malay, you want to say good evening, you say Selamat petag. Selamat petag. Selamat petag. The next language is Zulu. In Zulu, you want to say good evening, you say Sawubona. Sawubona. Sawubona. The next and the last language is Swahili. In Swahili, you want to say good evening, you say Habari za jioni. Habari za jioni. Habari za jioni. Now you know how to say good evening in 40 languages. Go out there, express the beautiful moments of sunset to all persons around you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Gracias. Gracias. Gracias.